In terms of setups and payoffs, I believe there are no better deliveries than what we see in the movies that we are talking about today. A franchise spanning 25 years, these movies personify death in a way that not even mastering the board game Mousetrap has you prepared to survive what's coming your way if you cheat what death has always wanted. And if there's one thing that's absolutely for certain, it's that an entire generation has been fully persuaded to never drive behind a logging truck. If there's any advice to walk away with, it's this. When someone around you is telling you not to do what you're about to do, maybe listen to them. It could just save your life. For a few days at least. So sit back, relax, and make sure death hasn't unfastened those seatbelts, because it's time we set off on the ride of our lives as we tempt fate and proceed into the impossible trek of talking about every franchise ever. Episode 4, Final Destination. Hello friends, and welcome to Every Franchise Ever, where I, Bryan Starr, am trying to watch, review, and rank the movies of every franchise ever. It is time to celebrate because we have just started our longest episode yet. At least it's the longest franchise, with 6 films, basically doubling the average of what we've done so far. But don't worry, time is of the essence. We're still going to do our best to keep it under an hour, and I think I have a good approach to make that happen. As a reminder, our full podcast episodes can not only be heard, but also watched on YouTube and Spotify. This is a video podcast. I'm currently waving to the camera right now, and, I think you're waving back, right? And don't we look goofy? But I'm so glad you're here. So, if it takes me waving to the camera for people to stick around, then wave I must. We have a lot of ground to cover, so let's begin our conversation talking about Final Destination 1, 2, and 3, The Final Destination, which was a lie because there's also Final Destination 5, and Final Destination Bloodlines.
Beware, there will be spoilers. If you haven't seen the movie yet, what are you doing here? Oh well, you've been warned.
Let's lay down the plan for today's episode. If I wasn't trying to release 13 plus episodes in a single month at the very beginning of launching this podcast, we would take a little further dive into each of these movies, but I genuinely do not have the time. And one of the main rules of this podcast is that this isn't a scene-for-scene breakdown of these movies. I have friends that do that. They do it well. I'm going to let them keep doing it and rocking it. But I still do want to talk about the movies because that kind of helps me figure out how I'm ranking. And so I think for this episode, we're going to talk about every movie, but kind of really just focus up on some of the wonderful setups and payoffs, but especially when it comes to the opening sequences that are just so much fun and what these movies are famous for. I think this is the best approach because the movies really aren't that super connected, so if I skip over some of the storylines, I think that's going to be okay. But yeah, enough clarifying. Let's begin with the iconic first film, and holy cow, what a cast, right? We got Devon Sawa, all right, my Casper, Ali Larter, Sean William Scott, and of course, Tony Todd. Our film begins with a senior class boarding a plane for their senior trip to Paris. And a series of events leads to this plane, just after takeoff, getting destroyed. And what plays out is a brutal and gruesome scene, and it goes on for quite a while, and we see kind of our main characters be killed, and eventually the plane is blown up. Except, even though we're 15 minutes into the movie, it's all fake. Alex, our lead, played by Devon Sawa, realizes that he has a premonition and everything that we saw is going to happen. And so things start happening in real life that were happening at the very beginning of the premonition. And that's when he realizes, we got to get off this plane. And so he freaks out. And more people are kind of freaked out as well. They leave with him or they get kicked off the plane. One of the teacher even has to stay behind to make sure that they're going to be okay. And sure enough, even though everyone's kind of mad at him, sure enough, they see the plane take off and blow up in the middle of the air. It was real, and he just saved the lives of his friends. That is until one of the remaining students in a freak accident hangs himself. We see that the impossible has happened. Death in the form of an unseen presence is here for revenge and taking out the survivors one by one. And we get this confirmed by local mortician Bloodworth, played by Tony Todd, who tells Alex that all of the survivors disrupted Death's plan, and it craves to get back on track. A few more survivors are mysteriously killed by freak accidents, and this is when Alex realizes that Death is taking them out in the order of how they should have died on the plane, based on his premonition. And this is, of course, based on where they're sitting, depending on where the plane was breaking apart and blowing up. That's how that comes to be. But this is where the Death's plan can change. Our last four remaining survivors, they're in a car. They're about to be hit by a train. And a friend, Carter, is supposed to die next. But Ali Larter's character, Clear Rivers, saves him. And then immediately Death moves to whoever is next in line, Sean William Scott, and decapitates him, like right there in front of everybody. And what we have discovered is that death can be stopped. It can be prolonged if someone is intervening into whoever is next in line and helps them survive. And this is exactly what Alex does for Clear Rivers. She's trapped in a car, surrounded by fire and live fallen electrical wires. And so Alex, who is not supposed to die next, grabs the wires and makes everything explode, essentially, and kind of dying in place of Ali Larter. However, Alex is able to be brought back to life. And this is revealed when we see that the remaining three survivors are alive and well and have flown to the original final destination. They are in Paris. But Alex is still obsessed with Death's plan. And technically, he's next on the chopping block. And sure enough, Death's plan is still going to happen. And so this neon sign comes swinging towards Alex. However, Carter pushes him aside, saving his life. He intervenes, causing Death to skip to the next person, which turns out, unfortunately, is Carter. And that neon sign that has swung is now swinging back and takes him out. And that's how the movie ends. I want to focus a little bit more on this first film because from here on out, every movie is essentially copy and paste. You have a brutal opener, which is, just the premonition. Characters figuring out how the rules work while survivors are being picked off one by one. Cheating Death by thinking outside of the box. And then typically Death still getting revenge. The first rule of this series that we are introduced to, and holy cow, does it get a little elaborate later on, but the first rule on how to cheat Death is having someone intervene in what's meant for you. Okay, so we're going to make note of any added rules or any special ways that some of these people have been able to cheat Death in some way or another. But we are going to move on to Final Destination 2. And clearly, this is the most popular opening of any Final Destination movie. Potentially, it has to be right in like someone's top 10 most notable ways to die in a horror movie. It is, of course, time to take drive on the highway where absolute chaos ensues when a chain breaks on a logging truck and logs start flying everywhere, impaling drivers and causing a massive, brutal pileup. And I just got to speak about this sequence because it is brilliant. Practical cars are flying everywhere. Explosions that are only used today in high-budget action films are happening left and right. People being killed. It's wildly impressive. I would have loved to have been able to work on such a feat. And this is a sequel to like just kind of a random horror franchise at the moment. But of course, all of this is simply a premonition from our lead, Kimberly, who has stopped her car from entering onto the highway and preventing the death of pretty much everybody in the cars behind her. Like I said, I don't want to get too deep into the story of some of these, but here are a few things to highlight, especially when it comes to the rules for dodging death. This is a weird one. This is the only movie where death works backwards when it comes to taking out the survivors of the pileup. And here is their explanation. These survivors of the pileup should have been dead a while ago. And this is kind of a nice little twist, but essentially what has happened is that when people survived the airplane in the first film, that essentially created a butterfly effect that led the survivors to living longer than they should have. And so what death is doing is, instead of moving forward in its plan, it's got to move backwards to tie up loose ends. It's a bit of a stretch, but that's what they're telling us. Oh, but also, guess who shows up? It's Clear Rivers, who has been living in a padded cell on her own decision because she doesn't want to die. And Alex is dead. He was hit by a falling brick, which is such a bummer. But apparently Sawa was not available. So we have Clear Rivers, and she's showing up. She's leaving that padded cell to help the survivors in this film. By the way, shout out to some of the deaths in this film. Absolutely brutal death from Nora in the elevator. Kat with the airbag threw me off guard. And then even Rory with the barbed wire fence. Good stuff in this one. A new rule has been added thanks to the advice from Mortician Bloodworth. Tony Todd is here, and he says, only new life can defeat death. This is mistaken terribly by the crew that a baby needs to be born from the survivors. But when it's realized the pregnant lady who was there didn't die in the premonition, Kimberly realizes that she must die and be brought back to life. And that's exactly what happens. In fact, not only does Kimberly survive death, but Officer Burke is safe as well, essentially stopping death's plan. So, how do you top that opening sequence from the previous film? Well, Final Destination 3 is certainly going to try, and I think they do a pretty good go at the amusement park. This is where Wendy, played by Mary Elizabeth Winstead, is at the park with her boyfriend and friends as her entire class seems to be celebrating their graduation. Wendy is there taking photos for the yearbook, photos that will come in handy later. And while on a roller coaster, a wonderful sequence of setups leads to the coaster breaking apart and picking people off one by one. It's brutal, just like the previous films. It's absolutely insane, and it has me thinking twice about getting on a coaster for sure. Of course, this was just a premonition. By the way, so far, this is the longest we've been into any of these movies until the premonition is over or realized. And so we're 20 minutes into this movie. Wendy, of course, freaks out, and a large group of people either get kicked off or leave on their own because of her freakouts. And as always, the vision comes true. And it is brutal. Now, we're going to fast forward a little bit, skip some of the random talking, because we got to get to the tanning bed sequence. We all know about this sequence. It's one of the most impressive setups and deaths so far. And what I really love about it is how much it takes for everything to happen. In order for these girls to be locked in their tanning bed, set on fire, all the doors are locked so no one can get in and help them. It's absolute chaos. However, it ends with what is easily one of the greatest match cuts in film history. Yeah, I said it. But what's happening is we're looking from above and we see the two. I'm going to kind of do it in the video. We see the two tanning beds like this. All right, we're looking from above. They're on fire. They're screaming. Match cut to two caskets that are also just like that. Like, it is a perfect match cut, and you hear their screaming kind of just die off as we get into the funeral scene, and it's beautiful. It's an intense 10-minute long sequence, brilliant, and in a moment that I realized pretty early on while watching. Oh, I like this one. Now, while the girls are being taken care of, Wendy is finally looking at her photos from the amusement park, and that's when she realizes the photos hint at how people are going to die. It was pretty obvious that her boyfriend was going to be killed by the roller coaster, and the girls were going to somehow be surrounded by fire. We're also getting characters to make the 180 connection, which is nice because that number appears all throughout this entire franchise. Keep your eyes peeled because sometimes it's not direct, but 180 is the name of the flights, Flight 180 from the first movie. Mile marker 180 is where the chaos of number 2 begins. A big reason why I like this movie again is because of the elaborate setups for the kills. Some are intense and stressful, some take a long time, but the payoff is always quick. It's unreal and will leave you with your jaw on the floor. I'm a big fan of this movie. This is also helped by the fact that despite having the photos helping with the deaths, it isn't really clear until the death actually happens. In fact, sometimes the death becomes true because the survivors are trying to save them. In the end, we have 3 survivors, but not ultimate reasons as to why death was finished with them. Until 5 months later, Wendy and the other 2 survivors coincidentally find each other on the same train in a completely different city far from home. The train number? 081, but what does that look like when you look into a mirror? Yeah, sure enough, death has collected the survivors and crashes the train, finally killing every survivor of the amusement park. By the way, Tony Todd visually doesn't show up. You do hear his voice a couple of times, but he's not there to guide our survivors to safety. These guys had it a little difficult. Not all the answers were handed to them. Moving on to Final Destination 4, or my bad, The Final Destination, which brings up a pet peeve of mine. I hate when a franchise thinks that they're done, and so they name that last movie, they give it like a finale type of name, and then just a few years later they're making more, and it just ruins everything. And so, of course, here we have The Final Destination, even though there's 2 more movies. But I digress. Number 4 is nothing too special, and we're barely going to take time talking about it, because essentially it's a poor attempt to copy and paste the design of each film, but make it a fun 3D movie. But of course, what happens when you watch the movie in a 2D setting? There's just stupid stuff flying towards the screen that clearly would have been 3D, but now it's just silly, and that has to live forever. This movie also tried to do something new in the final act, but I find it so egregious I can't forgive it. Our opening sequence for this movie happens at a raceway where a large collision essentially kills everyone. It is quite a brutal disaster, for sure. The main character, Nick, finally catches on that death is killing everyone based on when they would have died in his premonition. But at one point, because they saved one of their friends from dying, they think death has been stopped. And this is a terrible attempt in the movie to make us think that everyone is safe, especially when there's still like 30 minutes left in the movie. They eventually realize they got the order wrong, and when one of them gets smashed by an ambulance in a moment that you could see coming in a mile away, Nick realizes the other 2 survivors are back in danger. Death is not done with these people. Thank goodness. And then what follows is a 10-minute wild setup for all hell to break loose at a mall where everyone dies, and it's brutal. There's a pretty cool escalator scene that happens, just for it all to be a premonition. You don't get to do two premonitions. It's like watching a whole movie where someone wakes up at the end and it's just all a dream and all of it was for nothing. And what really stinks is that now we have to see parts of that happening again. But of course, now he knows how to stop everything. The movie ends with our three survivors. They are in a coffee shop where eventually a semi-truck drives into them because of some faulty construction equipment. I can't hide my distaste for this one. I'm sorry. It feels like a money grab, right? This is during the 3D era. Maybe it's even right at the beginning. But despite the double premonition fake out, there's nothing new to this world, and I don't like it. So let's move on to Final Destination 5, a movie that seems to start taking this franchise a little bit more seriously. We're finally taking a step away from the early 2000s teen movie dude bro atmosphere. It's not entirely a home run, but we do have a new rule being introduced. First, though, let's talk about the opening sequence where a company is taking a retreat. They're all loaded onto a bus. That bus is stopped on a bridge, and that bridge starts collapsing. There's too much traffic happening, and so as the bridge is collapsing, everyone's running off the bus, and people are dying one by one, depending on how the bridge is breaking apart. I think it's the weakest opening sequence of any of the movies, but it's still entertaining. But yes, sure enough, in the end, it's all a premonition, and our lead, Sam, gets everyone that's important in the movie to safety, and then of course the bridge collapses and everyone dies. Now we are at a funeral for everyone who died in the accident, and that's when Tony Todd is back. He's showing up, and he simply just tells our lead that death doesn't like to be cheated. And it's super random and super weird from their perspective. But yeah, having Tony back is very welcomed. One of the best setup and payoffs in this movie is the gymnastics scene. And well done. I mean, it is filled with tension. Even the way that she dies is absolutely brutal. It certainly feels like a return to form that we saw in the third film. But Tony Todd shows up again and lets the survivors know about the rules of death. So finally, right? Finally, they're getting a little bit of help. But he also gives them a new rule. Take the life of someone who isn't meant to die, and you get to live on their time. These rules, these rules are coming out of nowhere. But as Tony Todd says, I don't make the rules. I just clean up after the game is over. Tony Todd for the win. A whole hour into this movie, by the way, and finally the characters have realized that death is killing them in order of how they would have died on the collapsed bridge. And I actually really like that, because for some of these movies, I'm looking at you, number 2, it's almost too easy that these people figure it out. They either have to do like a simple internet search, or they have a survivor that can help them. At this point, though, the survivors are finally dealing with the news that they can kill someone else in order to survive. They have an in on knowing how to get through this. And this turns into a domino of incidents we're skipping, eventually leads to our main character, Sam, having the lifeline of an FBI agent. Again, a lot happens to get there. Sam did not kill this FBI agent. But yes, finally, Sam and his girlfriend are safe. I wanted to get through that sort of quickly just because the ending is pretty fun. And here's what happens. Sam and his girlfriend, who was his ex throughout the movie, but they're back together. They're going on a trip. Lovers reunited. Their conversation is interrupted by someone causing a disturbance, and they're eventually kicked off of the plane that they're on. As takeoff begins, Sam overhears someone say that the interruption was caused by a kid who had a panic attack and wanted off the plane because he had a vision. And that, of course, is when we realize our heroes are on Flight 180 and the entire movie is set back in 2000. And as we all know, Sam and his girlfriend, they don't survive this time as the plane explodes and they die a gruesome death. And it's great. The clues were all there, right? Like the cell phones being used, even the attire. But there's one thing that throws this off completely. It's kind of a plot hole, and that's when earlier when we see Tony Todd, he mentions that he has seen all of this before. People messing with Death's design. And of course, we're all led to believe that it's because he has lived through the previous movies as the helper. But this movie happens right before Final Destination 1, so what is Bloodworth referring to? And the funny thing is, we don't know. It's clearly a misdirect that could be chopped up to, he's a mortician, so he's experienced this before. And would you believe that this potential plot hole has been answered in our final film of the franchise, Final Destination Bloodlines? Fun fact, this is the only Final Destination movie that I saw in theaters, and my goodness, am I glad that I did. It is a lot of fun. It's the longest in the series at 110 minutes, whereas the others kind of sit around the 90-minute mark. The opening sequence is a big one, a large-scale attempt, both in location but also in time, as this is taking place in the late 60s. There's a grand opening of this fancy restaurant at the top of a high-rise tower. Think about a restaurant being at the top of the Space Needle. And through a series of wonderful setups, things start going nuts. And the tower starts falling apart. Now, some of this has to do with all of these crazy people jumping on a floor made of glass. I don't care how much you pay me. I'm not jumping on a floor made of glass. I don't care how tempered that glass is. I don't trust it. The glass floor breaking begins a series of issues, including a fire breaking out, causing a massive explosion, an elevator full of people falling, the tower's base starting to crack and starting to lean because too many people are on one side of the restaurant. It's an absolute disaster. It's brutal. I keep using that word, but it's just true. In the end, our main girl from the disaster, Iris, she's trying to save this boy. They're the only two remaining people, and they fall to their death. And sure enough, this is a premonition, but not from the perspective of Iris, but instead from our main character, Stephanie, who turns out keeps having this same dream, this same premonition, and it's of her grandma, Iris. These dreams and premonitions are affecting Stephanie so much that she decides to go home and try and figure this out for herself. And this is where she learns that her grandma Iris is still alive, and her uncle doesn't want to talk about it, but mentions that this is why Stephanie's mom is so screwed up and absent from her life. Needing to figure this out, Stephanie decides to find her grandma, and she does in the middle of nowhere, fully on an end of times type bunker, on a compound that the Walking Dead wishes they could have stumbled upon, seemingly ready for an attack, except the attacker is death. We learn that the premonition is exactly what Iris saw when she was at the restaurant tower. And instead of it happening, she was able to save everyone in that restaurant. Especially because people started finally looking down and realizing the glass floor was about to break. Iris spent her whole life collecting evidence and following death's journey, obituary after obituary of people dying who should have died when the tower collapsed. And when death finally caught up to Iris's husband, it was time for them to lock down. and Iris went into crazy mode and essentially, traumatized her two kids, who we know as Stephanie's mom and her uncle. To prove this is real, Iris decides to step outside for the first time in 20 years and make sure that Stephanie has a book filled with all of the proof she needs. But then, Iris realizes Stephanie does not believe her, and so she allows death to claim her in a bloody mess, which is now covering Stephanie, who is freaking out. At Iris's funeral, Stephanie's mom shows up, and obviously there's some resentment, but the family is celebrating that everyone is together despite Iris's death. And they're celebrating with a backyard barbecue. The barbecue, which has one of the craziest setups to a death in this entire franchise. A setup, by the way, that began a full 25 minutes earlier when we see the uncle show us how his lawnmower can be turned on and off. Because eventually a rake falls over and turns on the lawnmower and runs over the uncle's face as he falls backwards thanks to a piece of glass that went from ice to cup being thrown on the grass. It's truly a masterpiece, and there's a reason why the marketing really kind of just focused on the setup of that scene. So the uncle is dead, and Stephanie is addressing the family and showing them what she has learned from this book. And this is when we're introduced to a new way that death has been working. Because there were so many survivors in the restaurant, death couldn't move fast enough, which meant the survivors started having kids. And those kids started families. And the survivor family tree grew quickly, faster than how death could move. So not only is death tying up loose ends of the survivor, death needs to take out the families as well. Because to death, none of them should have been born in the first place. And because death focuses on a family at a time, and the uncle was next in line after his mom, Iris, everyone in the uncle's bloodline is next based on their age. The first child in line to die, the eldest, Eric, who somehow survives death's attempt at his tattoo shop. And as Stephanie is trying to protect Eric during a walk in the neighborhood, Stephanie's brother, Charlie, asks her how all of these random things that they're seeing could kill him. And she lays out this scenario that, one thing happening to the other, and everyone's kind of laughing, except shot for shot, event for event, this happens to the middle daughter. And she gets crushed into a trash truck. But why her? Why did Eric survive death's attempts, especially when no one was intervening and help him? Well, this turns out Eric's dad isn't the uncle, but instead born from an affair that the mother had, which was a crazy piece to reveal. But that's why the middle daughter died, because she was the next in the bloodline. At this point, everyone is sort of convinced, and based on some writing in Iris's notebook, they find a name of someone that they should talk to, someone by the name of JB. A nickname for William John Bloodworth. Yes, sure enough, 14 years later, Tony Todd has returned to the franchise, which of course makes it extra special knowing that Tony Todd passed away the year prior to this movie being released. Bloodworth actually knew Iris. And this is a great little reveal. Remember in the premonition, she is the last survivor with a kid that she's also trying to help survive. It was Bloodworth. And of course, in reality, she did save him, right? And everyone else in the building. And when it comes to Death's timeline, Bloodworth actually died right after Iris did. And so he's pretty much last in line of everyone that was at the restaurant. And as always, he is the keeper of the knowledge and lets them know about death's rules and how to possibly survive like Kimberly did in Final Destination 2. You either kill or you die and be brought back to life. And this is a great moment. Right before Tony Todd leaves, he says, "I intend to enjoy the life I have left, and I suggest that you do the same. Life is precious. Enjoy every single second. You never know when." And with that beautiful sentiment that I can't help but see perfectly aligns with Tony Todd saying this on purpose because he knew about his sickness in real life, he leaves. He walks away, and he wishes them good luck and goodbye forever. It's just beautiful. It's wonderful, and you can't help but cry, especially the first time you see it. With the new knowledge that they have about how to survive, Eric suggests to his younger brother, who is deathly allergic to peanuts, to eat some peanuts. And then Eric will bring him back to life because thankfully they find themselves in a hospital. The younger brother eats a peanut treat and sure enough starts choking, and Eric refuses to give him the EpiPen because this is how the younger brother is going to survive death, dodge death. But they're not paying attention because the room that they're in has an MRI that has been started. And as it is starting to, harness its power, some things start getting, any sort of metal object starts getting thrown to the machine, including all of Eric's piercings. All of them. And it hurts, but there's also a wheelchair in there, and this wheelchair flings Eric to the entrance of the MRI and slowly is just crushing him into the MRI. And the younger brother, he also dies. Not from the peanut allergy, but when he opens the door, is impaled by the same metal vending machine spiral that gave him the treat in the first place. The irony is thick. But it has me wondering, why did Eric die? He wasn't a part of the bloodline. And this leads me to a direct quote from Bloodworth before he left. "If you mess with death and lose, things get messy," and messy they did. At this point, the entire bloodline of the uncle has been wiped, which means it's time for Stephanie's mom. To protect her, Stephanie, her brother Charlie, and her mom head to Iris's compounds, but before they can get inside, a massive explosion happens, all thanks to a plan that Death had started all the way back when we first meet Iris in her compounds with the plant. Which I believe this is like the biggest amount of time between a setup and a payoff, and I love that attention to detail. Right before the explosion happens, Stephanie Moms pushes Charlie away, but the explosion causes Stephanie to be stuck in a vehicle that has been knocked over and landed into a pond. Now, Stephanie's mom didn't die by the explosion and has one final moment to save Charlie from fallen debris right before the mom is killed, making Stephanie next in line. And sure enough, she drowns, but is saved by Charlie and brought back to life, essentially ending Death's journey to take out the final bloodline. The movie ends as they all do. Everything is fine and dandy and safe, and life can go on because these heroes have stopped it. They have survived. But that's when we're told that technically Stephanie didn't die. It was if Charlie was able to bring her back out of being unconscious just by using CPR, it means that her heart technically didn't stop. And after, again, yet another wonderful setup and nod to the first premonition by using a penny, all chaos erupts as a train derails and tears down the neighborhood. And what is that train carrying? A big pile of logs that takes out Stephanie and then Charlie, fully ending the bloodline cycle. The end. Ugh. It's a lot of fun. It's so fun to me. The Final Destination franchise has a lot of forgotten, amazing moments, and unfortunately, I think it comes down to a combination of bad writing and acting mixed with the fact that every movie is very formulaic to the point where once I get to number 4 and 5, I'm a bit over it. It's just not new anymore. But at this point, there's only one thing left to do. And after talking about 6 movies, I am certainly excited to get to this final segment. It's time for the ranking. This is our longest ranking yet, and I believe I've nailed this one. Because at first, it's obvious. In 6th place, I'm putting the Final Destination. The confidence of naming the movie as the finale has already screwed itself. But the combination of being a 3D cash grab with the double premonition fake out and kind of racist ickiness that I didn't even get into, there's nothing special happening here. And even if you disagree in anything I'm saying, I think we can all agree that this is what you get when you don't include Tony Todd. In 5th place, I coincidentally have part 5. There are some things that I enjoy here. New rules, Tony Todd is back, the connection to the first film. But at this point in the franchise, it's really just feeling like nothing new. And I believe the positive that I have mentioned is just really the only thing from saving this from being forgotten. I don't hate it entirely, but I enjoy the other movies more. And that brings us to the top 4, and I feel like this is where I lose people or not. But in 4th place, I'm putting number 2. I think I'm not a fan of how involved Clear Rivers was. I hate how confusing death moving backwards needs to be. And Kimberly seems to know every single move. Thanks to multiple visions, it's almost too easy for her to figure everything out. I can forgive it being too easy that, Tony Todd knows everything about death, but how much more help do those people need? I think people unfortunately have to look past that incredible opener to see that it's just not as strong as the others. Including the movie that is in our 3rd place spot. And this is when it gets interesting because I'm actually putting the very first movie in 3rd place. I don't need to dwell on it. It's the original. The concept is brand new here, and there doesn't need to be any extra rules or added buffs to make it easier to dodge death. This is the only movie that really leans into death being in some form of manifestation versus other films where things just sort of line up perfectly. So that's why I've put it higher than maybe some people might. But sometimes it's fun to watch coincidences line up perfectly, and I believe our 2nd place film does it very well. And who knew a 3rd film could be so strong, but sure enough, Final Destination 3 deserves the 2nd place spot. I loved watching this movie so much, I even took the time to write a thread about it. Elaborate setups, chaotic payoffs, match cuts, and split diopters to make a filmmaker drool. The use of the photos helping our characters figure things out versus, fantastical visions. Mary Elizabeth Winstead. I fully enjoy this movie, but there's a rule I've been following that I must stick to, and it's a big reason why number 3 isn't in 1st place, and it boils down to this. No Tony Todd, no full success. Sure, his voice shows up, and that's fun, but it means nothing. And that's why in our number 1 spot is the send-off for the legend. Of course, it's Final Destination Bloodlines. Everyone agrees it's the best. It has the highest scores on every platform for any Final Destination, especially coming from the critics. Maybe it's because it had been quite a while since the last one. Maybe the technology allowed us to have crazier kills and an over-the-top premonition, but I disagree. It's clear this movie is made by a couple of visionaries that see the concept and knew exactly how to bring it home. Smart setups from the beginning. The use of camera angles to make sure tension is being built. Switching up the formula in a way that doesn't match exactly the same as the previous 5 films, but still holds true to the lore, the rules, and the fandom of it all. I think Bloodlines is a massive success, and I genuinely couldn't believe it when I walked out of the theater. I remember thinking to myself, is this good? Is this very good? And I had just watched the franchise to prepare for this new one. Number 6 deserves the number 1 spots, and I have spoken. Lock it in, the official ranking of the Final Destination franchise. Holy cow, we did it. Just to give you a little bit of behind the scenes, it took me 5 to 6 hours to write all of this out. And for those of you watching, you can clearly see me looking at my notes, and I don't care. That's always kind of been the plan, especially because I tend to go off on tangents when I'm talking off scripts, and I do a bad job of talking off the top of my head. And I want to do a good job of presenting the facts, arguing my case, and treating these movies with respect, because if I'm trying to come up with the ultimate ranking of each movie, I want to make sure that I can back my reasoning as to why. I'm taking this very seriously, and hopefully that's cool with you guys. And as we get to the end of our largest episode yet, I just have to say again, thank you for being here. It truly means the world that you are trusting me to be the official movie ranker of the world. Okay, just kidding, I know. But hey, a man can dream, alright? It's what I'm striving for. I've been so busy that I still have not been able to get this on any other platforms. I truly apologize. So for now, you can watch it on YouTube. You can watch it on Spotify and listen to it as well. But yes, trust me, I'm getting there. I just don't know when. But we're working on it, okay? But yes, one more thing that I would love for you to do, if you don't mind, just in the comments, let me know what you think about the episode. You can actually comment on both YouTube and Spotify, which is very cool. But also, can you share this with some of your friends, especially if they are fans of the franchise that I've already talked about or am talking about now and in the future? That would be amazing. Thank you for that. And then a quick plug for anyone who would like to become a member of our Patreon or Ko-fi. This hopefully gets to a point where I can just keep doing this forever. And I would love that. And it's going to be because of the support of our followers and members. And so real quick, it's $3 a month on either platform. You have a huge amount of power when it comes to deciding future franchises for future episodes. And then of course you get a nice little shout out from me just as a thanks. If you are watching on the video, there's a QR code here, and you can scan that and it will take you to every link ever to follow us everywhere. And, of course, if you want to become a member, you can do that too. Episode 5 comes out at the end of the week, where we have an absolutely over-the-top bonkers time with the 3 films of the Basket Case franchise. And if you know, you know. It's about to get nuts. But for now, I am heading to New York Comic Con. In fact, by the time I get this posted, I will already have my feet in the city and hopefully already eating a piece of pizza. Fingers crossed. And until we see each other again, I've been Bryan. And thank you for watching, listening, sharing, and commenting as I take the plunge doing what no one has done before. Watching, reviewing, and ranking the movies of every franchise ever.